Welcome to the AmericanaMusic.com podcast with your host, Sarah Popejoy.
Today on the AmericanaMusic.com podcast, we are interviewing Grammy-nominated female singer-songwriter Leslie Jordan with her first solo full-length Americana album, The Agonist, releasing this Friday, April 25th, produced by Kenneth Pattengale of the Milk Carton Kids. The album is a collection of songs adapted from the writings and poetry of her grandfather, Robert S. Gott. The album also features the Milk Carton Kids, Brittney Spencer, and Sarah Watkins. We are so excited to have Leslie Jordan on our show today. Welcome, Leslie.
Hi, thanks for having me on. I'm pumped to be here.
Awesome. So the audience gets to know you a little better. Where are you from originally?
I'm from East Tennessee, born actually in North Carolina, but raised in Johnson City, Tennessee. Lived there till college, went to school at MTSU. So I'm really a Tennessean for most of my life. I lived in Indiana for a couple of years and Hawaii for a couple of years, but Tennessee for the largest portion of my life.
Okay. Man, we've had a lot of people from East Tennessee on this podcast
Really?
now. Yeah.
That's good music comes out of the hills.
It does. Who were some of your musical heroes growing up?
That's a great question. I think growing up, we listened a lot to like oldies. My parents were big into music in the 70s. So, a lot of the Eagles. My mom loved James Taylor. Dan Fogelberg is her favorite artist. Carole King, the Carpenters. My dad, oh my gosh, my dad has this sort of, I don't know what the word would be for it, but this ability to connect a song with every moment of his life. so like a song would come on the radio and he'd be like, okay, that was prom 1970, and he had a story to go with every song. So my soundtrack of my childhood was their soundtrack of growing up. So I grew up really with that sort of Laurel Canyon vibe of music in my house. And then in third grade, I went on a camping trip with a friend and they introduced me to country music and Alan Jackson, Reba McEntire, Faith Hill, John Michael Montgomery, Garth Brooks. And then the next year is when I got my first guitar and started taking lessons from Morel Music in downtown Johnson City from a man named David Yates. And he taught me the 4 chords I needed to know. And then we spent the rest of our guitar lessons singing country songs. So yeah, I fell deep in love with that music. Alison Krauss, I would say, probably shaped me musically in that era more than anyone. Yeah. So I kind of an eclectic mixture. And then I get into middle school and start listening to like alternative music. And so my tastes were all over the map. I'll just say that, early on, it was that sort of 1970s folk rock, and then into country music.
As we said in the introduction, that this album is about your grandfather, Bobby. Can you set up the story about your grandfather and how you came across his writings, which this album is based around?
About 30 years ago, my grandfather passed away and his sister went to clean out his house in Cerrito, California, called my mom and said, I'm at your dad's house. Is there anything you want of his? Rewind the story. My mom never really knew her dad. He left when she was 4. She had some interactions with him kind of throughout her life, but they were mostly negative interactions. She told her aunt, there's really nothing of his that I'm interested in. I do recall he wrote a poem for me one time. So can you just check to see if he has anything in writing? And that was all she said. And about a month later, a cardboard box packed full of notebooks and journals showed up on her doorstep. So this would have been in 1995. She spent the next 20 years kind of combing through those and I think reconciling her story. There were moments where she would be reading his logged journals, the timeline, and she would be like, okay, this was the year I was here. And this is what I was doing in 1967. And this is what I was doing in 1973 and so on and so forth. And really getting to know him. She and I started talking more and more about it. I would say 2015, 2016. My mom is an amazing writer, poet. She saw the through line kind of right away. This was sort of imprinted on me, even though he was never around. And then actually through a book my mom gave me, sort of discovered this creative writing process. The more we got into that, the more we started talking about his story. And she photocopied all of his poetry for me and put it in a binder and sent it to me because I just said, I'm so curious. I want to read some of his writing. The more time I spent in that writing, the more I got to know him and thought that it would be an incredible story to tell. And my medium is songwriting. I wanted to see if I could sort of reconcile his story a little bit and also trace that through line between him to my mom to myself in this really kind of gift that we were given.
Yeah. Poetry and writing it can be so personal, and there was such a disconnect personally with him. So I can just imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And he journaled like prolific, like he was constantly writing. He was an alcoholic. And so you can tell sort of through a lot of his journals, the times when he would be, binging, or he would kind of drop out and then he would come back in. And as he would sober up, there would be this sort of creative mindset and then things would tether off. About a year ago, my mom and I went and spent 3 days. We met in Kentucky and just sat and read his journals together. And some of it's really sad and dark and confusing. And you can definitely tell the times when he was drinking a lot. But I think what we kind of concluded was, that creative thing that is in all of us, regardless of your circumstances and the choices that you make, that thing will come out of you no matter what. And I think for him, creating and writing poetry, short stories, his longing for that sort of transcended whatever he did to try and kill that part of himself off. He had a dream of being a beat poet and ended up out in Venice Beach, California. And he wrote a journal entry basically saying like he couldn't believe how insufferable most of them were. And I think there was sort of that self-reflection even in that moment. He was able to kind of look at himself and go, okay, this is who I am. And the things that you hate about other people sometimes are the things you hate about yourself too.
Yeah.
He was a really introspective person. I think he was just a poet and a writer without an audience, but I think he longed for that connection more than anything.
Yeah. Yeah. A little over 2 minutes long, the first song on the album, then introduction into who Bobby, the agonist, and the main character, which the whole album is centered. Reading a little bit from that song, a generation dressed in black on the hills of Kerouac. So I love that line. Refers to Jack Kerouac, pioneer of the beatnik generation. Just for our audience, a literary and cultural movement that emerged in the 1950s, rejected consumerism and the current repressive and conformist society. They focused on freedom of expression and spirituality. Can you talk a little bit about your grandfather's story? Can you talk a little bit more about that dream of his about being a beatnik poet?
Yeah, he was raised in Crawfordsville, Indiana, in sort of the low-income area of town. His dad was a cartoonist, and his mom she was always sort of working for the family. I think being raised in that sort of, for lack of a better term, in poverty, she wanted to put an emphasis on education for her kids, that you can be anything you want to be. He and his brother and his sister, they were all very smart. It worked out well for them. He was born in 1928, so they were drafted into the war, and he was young. I think he was 18 when he ended up going into World War II, into the military. But he had this education and ended up going to school, I think at IU, for journalism. And that was his dream, was to be a writer. I don't know at what point along the way that dream sort of faded. I don't know if it was because of the war or because of he got married really young. My mom was born in 1951. He would have been married probably a year before that in 1950. It wasn't a great situation. He talks a lot about how that relationship was really strained. And so I think he probably reverted back to that dream he had when he was younger of what would it look like if I could just get away. Enter Jack Kerouac, enter this sort of someone handing you a dream scenario, on the road, I think was like a roadmap for his life and what he wanted. And so you hear about that in his writing. The piece that the agonist comes from is a piece called The Cape Cod Caper. And he tells the story of him and his friend Jean, how they left, both recently divorced, drove up to Greenwich Village, were in Greenwich Village for a long time, ended up down on the Cape, spent a lot of time in Massachusetts, Connecticut, I think New Haven. And it was just this sort of like, we'll pick up jobs where we can, but I came up here and I'm going to spend a whole year and I'm just going to write my first novel. And how naive of me to think that that is something that you can just do. And so he was really wrestling with that idea of who he wanted to be, but still sort of tethered to who he was. I don't think you just leave a family. He had a young daughter. My mom was 4 at the time. I don't think you can just leave behind your life and there not be some consequences for that. But yeah, I think he tried to write his way through life. Like I said before, he was, an alcoholic, and that would really affect his connectivity and, where he ended up in his life. I think that dictated a lot, sadly.
I'm going to skip to the song Truth or Consequence. I love that song. I love the line, time and again, I find myself still tethered to that desert. I was at a Dar Williams retreat once, and she was talking about how certain visuals, this is what it made me think of. She was talking about how certain visuals have multiple meanings, like bridges and doors and oceans and stuff like that. And I think why I love that line in that song so much, it's a metaphor for his life in a way, being tethered to the desert. Can you talk a little bit about that song?
Yeah, absolutely. That song, I love it as well. It's one of the most visual songs. He wrote a piece of poetry called This Place, and that's where it all came from. And then he actually wrote a footnote to This Place. And even within that footnote, there's still so much rich imagery It was written about the time he was a desert guard down in and around El Paso, Texas. So you get the images of the Violet Mountains, you get the image of the red sands, and then this yellow shack. And he talks about how it was like a railway shack. Trains would come and go, and they would be stationed there, and he would spend days by himself in that sort of lonely shack. And I think when life would get overwhelming, he would remember those moments and think, oh, it was great to be there alone in that desert. But thematically, what we saw throughout his writing was this sort of ache for a place, for home. And he even says, I think there's a line where he said, I know I'll never find my home. And every place he ever traveled to, everywhere he went, he was always asking the question, could this be my new home? Is this where I'm supposed to be? And so I think he just felt lost a lot of his life. So that song is sort of I would say the turning point in the record, because you get to that place, you kind of recognize this person has made some choices to upend their life. And whether you choose this or that, you're sort of stuck with that choice that you've made. And I think that was the moment where he thought, all right, I think this is the decision I've made. I'm going to leave my family. I'm going to go chase this dream. From that point forward, he was tethered to those choices and the consequences that came with it.
Yeah, for sure. So what I find interesting is that you talk about the album being a reflection on a complicated man whose life seemed insignificant to most. However, the decisions obviously had a profound effect on your mother and by proxy you. I find it interesting how the obsession we have as a society with significance in this world, we can inadvertently make decisions that we don't give the weight to that they deserve. They seem small at the time, but affect not only his life, but generations. Can you talk a little bit about the thing your grandfather did finally learn in All Things?
Yeah, that piece that he wrote that All Things came from, it's all over the map. And if I read it out loud to you, you'd be like, what is he talking about? And I think it is sort of out of the mind of a manic who spent a lot of his life alone and full of regret, finally coming to the conclusion that even the shittiest decisions, you can accept them for what they were and you can learn from them. Mm-hmm. And I think whether it was the pinnacle of his life, the end, or somewhere in the middle, maybe he wrote this 20 years before he died. I don't know the exact time he wrote that piece, but I do think he came to a place in his life where he realized you can either live with regret or you can live with the choices that you made and accept them for what they are. And I think that is where he came to. The line in the piece says, oh, all things, you finally learned to love. And then he starts to highlight all of these situations in his life, whether it was consoling prostitutes and paddy wagons. That was one of the lines from the piece. All of these places that he found himself that probably were way different than he expected in his life. Yeah. He's looking for the good in those things. And he's saying, you can love it. It wasn't what you wanted. It wasn't even good half the time, but it's okay. You can love those things. And so I think I've learned a little bit about acceptance through this whole process, that you can fight to control your life, or you can live open-handed and go, I'm going to make choices that I believe are the best for me, for my family, for my career, for whatever. But then whatever comes, we have to be okay with those things. We can't control the outcome of our choices, good or bad or indifferent, right?
Right.
I love that that's where the record ends. I love that that's where I feel like his resolve came to. And I feel like we have a lot to learn from that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Crawfordsville, Indiana was known as the Athens of Indiana, where the name Athensville came from. Also the name of the third song on the album. It's got beautiful imagery. It has an amazing gut-punching line. He ain't afraid of dying, just dying here. Can you talk about the creative process for writing these songs? How much is prose from your grandfather and how much is just learning about him from his writings? Talk a little bit about the approach you had for songwriting.
Yeah, that's great. I wanted to bring in co-writers on this project. I think there was a part of me that felt like I could have done it alone because I had a co-writer in his work. I'm not coming in with this empty-handed idea or concept. It was all right there for me. But I've been in co-writing spaces for the last 20 years. And what I love is having a third or fourth person in there that just gets to go, okay, this is what I'm hearing. This is what you're saying. This is what I'm reading, and helping sort of like bringing their outside perspective. Because I was so involved that I think sometimes it was hard for me to feel like I was getting the right picture. So to be able to share, here's the piece that I want to write this song from with a friend, a trusted friend. And that's what I tried to do. I tried to bring in people that I knew really well. I would always kind of feel out, and I know you're an artist, a songwriter, so you get this. You can go into a co-write with somebody and there's energy And you can feel if it's the right time to bring out that idea or not. The sacred thing I'm holding on to, is this the right person? And I just really tried to do that. So I would be in co-writes with people, or I'd be in situations where there would be an opportunity to bring this up. And if it didn't feel right, then I just kept it to myself. But when the moment felt right, it was like, okay, I can't wait. And in Athensville in particular, was with two super close friends, a guy named Seth Talley, who used to be the band I was in. He was our tour manager. He's a producer. He's one of the best sound engineers you'll ever meet, and an incredible songwriter. And then my other friend, Stephen Cashwell, who just has this unbelievable ability he'll sit there quietly for like 2 or 3 minutes, and he'll have written 2 verses to a song. I don't know. There is some favor on your life. I sent them this idea before they came over one day and said, I want to write the song. It's from this piece titled Athensville. I think this is the concept. And it was almost immediate, like by the time they got here with the voice memo I had sent them of kind of the rough outline of like a melody for the verse, and then a rough outline for the chorus idea. It didn't take us long to finish the song. We pulled a lot of stuff from that piece, but then we did take some of the story as well and infer that into the writing. That line you mentioned from the bridge is not in his writing. We tried every time I wrote one of these songs, I really tried hard to put myself in the story. And how would I feel in this moment? What would I say based on what I know about him? And as a person who has that creative drive and urge inside of me, and I always ask the question, like, would this honor his work? I never took things too far out of context. I tried to stay really true to the piece. And if there was ever a suggestion or, something that didn't jive, which there wasn't really any of that, it wasn't hard to go. I'd redirect and find our way back to the center point of what we were there for.
These songs you've been writing since 2018, just kind of on and off. You said you like to have the outside perspective of someone else because the theme was so close to you and such a integral part of your own story and your mom's story. Did you get any pushback from your family?
My mom has been involved in the process from day one. She, as far as we know, Bobby's only child. I would never have done any of this without her permission and blessing and input. It's actually really been a gift for our relationship to have this connection. And she's been telling me even recently that there is sort of this, she's felt a little stuck in trying to tell her own story because she has felt that his story is sort of like cast a shadow on hers. She has all this stuff of his, and it's almost felt burdensome for her. And so I think this record is sort of lifting that burden off of her and pulling that boulder out of the way. So now she's feeling the freedom to move forward in her own telling of her story, which will involve his story. But she was like, how do I tell mine if his isn't told yet? I've got to tell his and then tell mine. And so I think this is helping her with that. So that has been really, really beautiful. I got to play at the LA Folk Festival just this past weekend and got to bring her out there with me. And so it's like this story is giving opportunities to invite her into, and I think redeeming some of the terrible and traumatic parts of her childhood.
Yeah.
She kind of jokingly, we got into the hotel and she kind of just said, thanks, Dad, like in sort of a sarcastic way, but like his story is really bringing us these sweet moments of redemption, I think, for her story and his. There has been very little pushback, but the pushback only came because my grandfather had a bad reputation. He was sort of painted as the villain. The last thing I want to do is glorify someone who wasn't really a stand-up person. And I don't necessarily, if you listen to the record all the way through, I don't necessarily think I'm glorifying him by any means. It feels like a very honest representation of a broken person who maybe didn't try their hardest, but I don't think anyone is irredeemable. And so that was the only pushback I got from anyone in my family was just this sort of like, are you sure? Like, he wasn't the best person in the world. I'm like, well, who is? Who is worth that?
Yeah.
We all make mistakes, but ultimately it's a story worth telling. And like I said, it was such minimal pushback. It felt for me, it's been a long time coming. I've known this record was the next thing I would do as an artist, and I'm really honored that I get to do it.
Yeah, I bet it feels really good too, finally knowing that you've been wanting to do this for a while. Finally, with the release coming up on April 25th.
It feels nice. It feels really good. It's like, okay, final stretch here. This is it.
Yeah. I don't think you don't glorify him at all in the album. I think that's one of the things I love about the album the most is the fact that it's so real and honest and it doesn't pull any punches. What do you hope this project does for the people who listen to it?
That's a great question. I think I hope for curiosity, maybe be the thing that people walk away from this with: curiosity for their own story, for their own family, for an openness to the ones that we sort of like cast out, an acceptance of the things we can't control. And that to me is universal, whether you're a music fan or an artist or not. Like, I'm not saying everyone's going to find a box full of their grandfather's lost writing and should make a record out of it, because I think it's really niche, like. So when I'm zooming out and kind of looking at like, what are the universal things I hope for people, it's that I hope there is sort of this awareness and desire for reconciliation within families, an awareness of what loneliness can put upon you, the importance of family and connection and community, and that creativity can really come from anywhere. A box full of old dusty journals, like I said, that really meant nothing to anyone for years and years and years, until they did. I think we can find goodness and truth wherever we decide to find goodness and truth.
I think when I listened to the album, I think what really hit me was it got me personally thinking about my own family trauma. You know what I mean? I liked how you approached it head on in an honest way that didn't run from it or make excuses for it, but just talked about this is what it is. And I think for a lot of people, I think that can be healing.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I think I even have the temptation sometimes of, because I've been sort of seeing it from his perspective, to forget that as like the listener or the viewer of this story, to absorb it more as that person affected by the negative choices. The creative writing practice that my mom and I are both certified in, it's called the AWA method. It was started in Amherst, Massachusetts. It's this prompt-based creative writing method that you sit with like 10 or 12 other people. You're all given the same prompt. You're given a specific amount of time to write, and then you share. A lot of times those moments will pull out some of those things that you're talking about, where it's almost like a 12-step program where it's confidential. You get to like, everyone agrees, I'm not going to share this with anyone else. And people will start to like unlock some of that trauma in the creative writing process. And we always say in the writing groups, it's not therapy, but it's therapeutic. Mm-hmm. When I read my grandfather's writing, I feel like he was sort of doing that, but he didn't have the group, right? He didn't have the people around him to like share those things with and identify, this is where this trauma started for me. And I think, we live in a generation now I'm grateful for, where therapy and healing work, that's all way more accepted than it was in his generation, even my mom's generation,
Yeah.
So I think you're dead on. I think it's really important that we do that work and we find a safe place to do that in.
When I first heard Living with Ghosts by Patty Griffin, Stones in the Road by Mary Chapin Carpenter, and 9 Objects of Desire by Suzanne Vega, I knew exactly where I was when I heard those. I can still tell you to this day when I heard those albums where I was.
Heck yes.
I think this album, The Agonist, I think it's a really amazing work of art, and I'm not just saying that. I think that it will be like that for a lot of people, that they'll know where they were when they heard this. You were part of the Christian duo All Sons and Daughters for about 8 years until 2018. You then focused on writing for other artists. Do you intend to continue making more Americana albums in the future? Is this kind of a one and done thing?
Well, first, I want to react to what you said, and I feel like I can't feel my arms or my legs, because those 3 records, I shouldn't even be mentioned in the same breath, but I have received that and like, wow, like I could only hope that for an album and for a piece of art that I'm sharing with someone else, So thank you for that. I don't take that lightly either. I really hear that and receive that and feel honored by that. Yeah, I think this is my path. I have really loved the places that music has taken me. I got to tour extensively for 7 years and loved all the places that took me. I am such a person who I can't do things without a conviction to do them. And for that season of my life, writing music for the church was the conviction. It was the thing I was meant to do. And I did it with every fiber of my being, and I will always be grateful for that season of my life. And then even the season that followed that, creating with other writers and taking what I learned from that experience and helping them write songs for their communities, that felt really important and imperative to my story. And I think it has led me to this place where, Americana music isn't that different. It's music for the people, of the people. That is my, I think, ultimate passion in life. So whatever is next will be that. But I anticipate it will be more of this. And when I look back on my life and the times in my life where I felt most myself, it was definitely in those places of telling stories and being intentional with the music that came and kind of like latched around those stories. So yeah, yeah, I hope there's more of this. I'm really trying to be intentional with that and how the release of this record comes out. And I hope for that, but we'll see. I'm trying to also just be super grateful for every opportunity. I like at 40 years old, I'm like, I still get to play music for a living. Like, this is awesome. It's what I dreamed about as a kid and I get to do it. So I'm thankful at every turn. And if that turn is the last turn, then I'm like ending on a high. And so I'm just trying to really enjoy it and appreciate it while I can.
That's great. That's great. I love that. Leslie, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure interviewing you for this record and for you sharing your story. It's been really great.
Thank you, Sarah. It's been sweet.
I encourage everyone to go out this Friday and save on whatever listening program of your choosing her album, The Agonist. It's really a great album, and everyone who loves Americana should definitely listen to this album.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's an honor and love what you're doing to highlight Americana music and just feel grateful for the opportunity to share.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Here's a short clip from next week's interview with Sam Robbins.
I had the same exact experience with this songwriter, David Wilcox, if you know him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was so frustrated. I was so frustrated with trying to write. And the thing about Nashville that was tough is the meeting of the music and the commerce, kind of the blurring the lines so deeply that it's kind of almost more commerce a lot of the time I found. I remember somebody told me, hey, we heard this guy, David Wilcox, you'd maybe like him. And so I just put him up on Spotify and it was like, oh, like the first song I heard, I was like, that, whatever that is. I'm opening for him next week, actually. But
oh, you are?
Yeah, I've cool. written with him now, and it was kind of like meeting Yoda. You know what I mean? It was amazing to hang out with him. And I just was listening to his album yesterday, actually, and I listened to Sean Colvin and his album actually yesterday on my drive.
That's wild.
Yeah, but it was that moment of like what the hell is that? I went home and I wrote like 3 songs, and it just was like, oh.
Thank you so much for listening to AmericanaMusic.com podcast. Be sure to go to AmericanaMusic.com and find playlists of the Americana artists we've interviewed here. Also, be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast platform.